Like my colleagues on the stage, I'm speaking on behalf of a larger group. Certainly not all just Texas Cattle Feeders Association have been involved in this pilot project. Like Kansas and Florida, we're trying to advance the idea of traceability, ID and traceability, and the benefits for the industry. We see this as much more positive. In fact, our organization would be supportive of mandatory because we believe the positives far outweigh the negatives. We understand completely that politically today that's not going to happen. So for the reasons that Kansas and Florida and Texas have engaged in a pilot project to try to advance that discussion within the industry and see what we can learn from it. So our working group, which has been underway for 5 months, the pilot project, we're the leadership of TCFA and Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, the Texas Animal Health Commission. We also have stakeholders from Kentucky and Florida that were involved in some of the discussion because those states, wanted to participate in the pilot project. The major packers, IMI Global is our database management company. We decided that when we started the project, we would utilize or incorporate everything that was in the marketplace today as best we could, knowing that at some point in time the industry will have to make a decision, whether it's a market-driven decision on technology or whether it is a joint decision of a national board of producers, for lack of a better term, to decide what technology that would best serve the industry. And then several of and all of the major tag manufacturers. Just a quick overview of the project. Like I said, we've been going for 5 months. We're going to do the first data analytics at the end of the 6th month. This is at least a 1-year project, probably a 2-year project. So I don't have some of the good metrics that Justin has, and I thought those were very informative. We have nearly 21,000 head enrolled in the program today. 80% all are tagged with low frequency. Today we will incorporate the UHF frequency. We've been waiting on a UHF back tag just to be able to marry those two tools, for lack of a better term, into a UHF system and just test that concept. Justin's already talked about speed of commerce. That is a huge thing. That and data confidentiality, trust in the database management and the protection of confidential data was the #1 thing that our working group identified, supported by input from a lot of other producers around the state. So we will be probably within the next 60 to 90 days engaging in incorporating UHF technology. So 21,000 head, 135 different groups of cattle. That's somewhere around 150. I haven't done the math lately on the size, ranging from a few head to some very large strings of cattle. 70 different farms and ranches of origin from 7 different states. So our Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arkansas, Louisiana, Florida, and Kentucky, if I remember correctly, are participating today. We will probably add a few other states. So like Kansas, we focus first on disease traceability, and we have some cattle in the project that are only interested in disease traceability and helping design and advance that concept. Very similar to the information that Kansas is entering into their database, so the number, obviously, the date, tagged at origin or the next site, next point of commerce, which is very important because, as Dr. Shearer noted, there are a lot of small producers, and some really don't have the facilities to be tagging cattle, but there are going to be some, in fact there already are, some producers that have started companies to go out and tag cattle for their neighbors, and then certainly they'll be tagged at the next point of commerce. We are recording each movement, at least that's a goal. As I've told my staff along the way, we're going to have as many failures probably as we do successes in this pilot. Like Gene said, that's why we call it a pilot, and we'll probably learn more from that than from some of the successes. So we'll capture most of the tags. We'll miss a few. I'll talk a little bit about value-added information here in just a moment. But we're trying to streamline as best we can on the disease traceability side of this project, knowing that we need to capture that basic information. And then we'll test it at some point by having state animal health officials ping that system looking for identified numbers. We've got about 80% of the tags that are 840, 20% 900 series tags, and I've already mentioned the UHF back tags that we probably will start in the next 60 to 90 days. The other thing we wanted to test, at least as a concept, and this is easier to talk about than it is to get done, there's about 6,000 head of the 21,000 that have value-added data incorporated in that trade between the seller and the buyer and entered into the database. So our participating feed yards decided that they would offer $5 a head incentive if people would enter certain information, which will be on the next slide, into the database. It's not paid when the cattle transaction is completed. It's paid when that information goes into the database. And the seller and the buyer are the only people that can ever see that information. Now, if the seller and the buyer decide to negotiate a higher value, that's up to them. And in fact, there is, depending upon the type of cattle, their background, and the feeding program that a particular feed yard has, or more importantly, the supply chain that they may be involved in, there's higher value across feed yards, different values across different feed yards for this data. And then data sharing throughout the beef industry segment. So the list of information that has an asterisk next to it is the mandated information to get the incentive payment. So you have an EID number, you have the farm or ranch of origin, which while we are getting some prem IDs, we're more focused on getting a producer name and address, a phone number, and an email. We think that would be sufficient. If we had to do disease trace back, obviously a prem ID would be an added bonus. Sex and breed, date of birth, pasture type, that has an influence on the type of rations, nutrition. As the cattle come into the feed yard, supplemental feed on cattle performance as they come into the feed yards. Some of these cattle are going through backgrounding yards. Most are coming in off of pasture operations. The animal health and productivity products and the dates utilized, and any type of BQA program information. Weaning weight, shipping date, and pay weight are set up in the spreadsheet, but they're not required. So at the feed yard level, you'll see that same information. We'll also be adding animal health and product performance dates, BQA information, the shipping date and the pay weight, and feed yard performance, average daily gain, feed to gain conversion. If that's something that is of importance back to the owner, especially a cow-calf producer that's keeping a lot of information on the genetics in their herd, that's a deal that can be transacted between the seller and the buyer. It's not a requirement, but we're certainly trying to encourage that, and it's facilitated by the spreadsheets that are in the database, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. At the packer level, similar information. The origin would certainly obviously be a feed yard and where they're coming from, the receiving date at the plant, quality grade, yield grade, and hot carcass weight. We had our first set like Kansas. We've got all different sizes and shapes of cattle that are in this program today. We had the first cattle die 2 weeks ago, and the carcass data has been, I saw that it had been transacted. I haven't looked at it. In fact, I don't want to know it. Has gone back to the owner of the cattle, which at that situation were the feed yard. Now, if the feed yard and the cow-calf producer or the stocker operator that they bought the cattle from agree that they're going to share that carcass data beyond the feed yard, that's their decision. The packing plants would prefer and have told us that they're willing to give it to the owner of the cattle, and that's the only people that they will give it to, and we certainly understand and respect that. IMI Global, as I mentioned, is the database manager, so they've designed the software and the website. In the beginning of the project, we were inputting information. However, and we'll continue to input it, whatever's easiest for the producer that's putting the cattle in the program. So we were entering, IMI staff and our own staff were entering data individually. They were transferring Excel spreadsheets and CSV files into the IMI database. IMI has now launched the web portal that producers or feeders can enter the animals directly into that website. And that's what we're encouraging to be used. Now, it can be done electronically. For a non-IT person, I just say data dump into that, but you don't have to manually enter all of the data individually into the system. There's a dashboard incorporated. That's really for management purposes as a tool. If an individual producer that's enrolled in the program wants to use that, it's available. So that's a quick overview of the pilot in Texas. I think you can see a lot of similarities between the states, but also some differences that we're just trying to see what might be the best system and the best tools to incorporate in the future. Thank you.